conducting a review into access and use of cash in the island. I will just introduce the panel, and I'll let you introduce yourselves as well. So I'm Deputy Montfort-Tadier.
Morning, Karen Wilson, Deputy Karen Wilson, Vice Chair of the panel.
Deputy Max Andrews, a panel member.
Thank you.
Elaine Millar, Minister for Treasury and Resources.
Russ Crowe, Head of Treasury and Investment Management.
And Graham Chidlow, Director of the Finance Hub in Treasury.
Thank you. You're all welcome. Thank you for coming in today. So let's get on to one question here about really the nuts and bolts of cash in circulation. So rather than the abstract concept of cash, we're looking at how physical cash works in our community in particular. So first of all, can you just confirm to us how much cash you think there is in circulation at the moment?
Well, I can confirm the amount of Jersey currency that we have in circulation, because of course there's sterling on top of that. Yeah. So right now, I think the last figures I've got end of August was we had a liability for 90 million roughly. So that includes both currency notes and coinage. Most of that's notes, 80 million, about 9 million's worth of coinage. The value of currency, we tend to look at year-end positions because it will vary quite a lot within the course of the year. So it tends to jump up around Christmas time when everybody sort of puts a few £10 notes in envelopes for children and so forth. So the most recent value, the December 23 value, was around £97 million.
Are there any other seasonal fluctuations, for example, in the summer, when tourists come in? Does that affect it?
You see some movements, but it's far more muted. It really ramps up around the Christmas time. So we tend to see quiet January, February time when the cash tends to come back in quite quickly. Yeah. We see a slight increase of about sort of 1-2 million around summertime, but that's not always the case. So the reason is we're almost one step removed. So it's the banks who hold a lot of the stocks for currency. So when Treasury gets called, effectively, it's when the banks run low. Right. So what you might have is a position where there is an increase in demand for currency from members of the public, but the banks have sufficient stock from their Christmas flow to meet that. So we wouldn't necessarily see it being pulled down from Treasury.
So on top of that, say £90 million of Jersey currency, which is in circulation at the moment, presumably in the island, I mean, there may be some Jersey money outside the island, but that's presumably negligible, is it?
I suspect it might be relatively not modest, but so if I explain how the liability for that 97 million is made up. So whenever we issue a pound's worth of Jersey currency, we get the face value in return. So the banks effectively buy currency off us. So a £20 note would mean an electronic transfer of £20 of sterling to us. Now, we reduce or write off that liability when that note comes back to us. So historically, if you issued a £20 note and it got eaten by the washing machine, for example, that note would never come back to us and we would retain that liability on our bank sheet indefinitely. So we've got an idea that a lot of that currency has probably been destroyed and won't make it back to us, but we've got quite a conservative backing policy about that. So we don't write off an amount which we suspect has been destroyed until it's validated. So I've got some figures, for example. So just
to clarify, in the sense that, for my benefit as well, although we say we have a liability, we have the cash to meet the liability.
That's what I mean. So
because people buy the money, they buy it on a one-to-one basis. They say, "Can we have £20 worth of cash?" Yeah. They give us £21 of £20
so
of credit,
£20 in your back pocket in the washing machine.
To pay.
Yeah, the states, when you say it's liability, the states has got £20 that it never has to pay back.
Exactly. So the net balance is
the bank's taken the hit potentially in that situation, is it?
Or
the customer, rather.
The individual
customer, yeah. And I guess that's one of the problems with cash. I mean, it's not what we're here to talk about specifically, but one of the problems with cash is that it can be destroyed, it can go missing.
Lost, stolen. Put in the washing machine.
Anyway, carry on. So I think you were telling us about the mechanism.
Yes. So what we've got at the moment is you've got sort of a historic liability for old notes issued that we still have on the books as a liability. We still have the assets to back them, which is why the fund is in quite a positive net asset position. So the D-class note, which is the sort of nice modern notes you see, that's about 70 million's worth of that liability. But we still have around 10 million's worth of the old C-class note, for example, which is the old red £10 note, if you remember those. You do see them now and again. So we hold that liability of 10 million and we have 10 million's worth of assets to back that. But the reality is probably that 10 million is either a proportion of it is either destroyed Some of it might be in piggy banks from people who have never kind of opened that up. We conservatively make sure if somebody came to Treasury and said, I have this old £10 note, can I have the sterling equivalent? We have the currency to back that up.
Yeah.
So for a £20 note, for example, the currency fund would take that £20 note and invest it in a low-risk strategy. So for a £20 note with current interest rates of 5%, you probably make £1 in a year. So you can imagine, first of all, you benefit from, if that note is destroyed by a washing machine, we keep the £20 and keep the liability. But also that balance is always growing because you're making interest on that amount. So it's quite a profitable venture for Treasury to manage this currency fund.
Yeah, yeah. Good, thank you for that. I think that's helpful. So in that respect, you've probably given us one advantage for the Treasury of cash is that it gets interest, so paper cash in circulation, although it holds its value on face value, in relative terms, it's becoming less valuable for the person who has it because of inflation. But yeah, that's understood. Do you think the public understand that interaction? Because we've have a lot of people saying we like cash because it means that there's no third party. But in fact, do you think people understand the fact that they've given their intangible cash that they have in their bank account effectively to government via the banks in order to get that piece of paper?
I don't think they have given it to government necessarily.
Well, they've paid the banks, and the banks have bought it off government.
They have somehow or other they have ended up with money in a bank account. Now, say they've got earnings, I don't think they would recognise that. I mean, government's almost the issuer. We produce the bits of paper that are the notes. But for someone to have money in the bank, they've either been given that money by someone, they might have been given a gift, or they've earned it and their employer has put the money in.
What I'm saying is
and they just take the cash out of the bank. They think they are taking their money out of the bank in cash. I would imagine that's how people think of the transaction. And a paper, a note is basically a promise to pay.
That's right. I don't want to get too philosophical, but I think we're trying to also to understand the global emotional attachment that people have to cash. And I think there's a sense in which nowadays, when you earn money, you don't ever have to physically have had paper money in your hand to have that. So there are a lot of people who have an affinity for cash, for paper money, for example, so that they'll feel comfortable when they have £100 in their wallet. But I'm asking whether they understand that link, that to get that £100, they've had to give £100 of their own intangible money in the bank to the bank to get that. And government, of course, is making profit off that from inflation, from interest. Is that a reasonable way to put it, do you think?
I think that people's primary concern...
I don't think the public would ever consider that aspect of government's involvement.
I've
I've never considered it until
public.
now. Some may do, but I've never considered it until now.
Yeah, yes.
And I don't think people would. It's just you have a cash note which enables you, it's an ability to buy things.
Yeah.
I think whenever we liaise with the public as well, their primary concern is the security of the note. So I think their major concern is they want to make sure the £10 Jersey note does have a guaranteed £10 sterling value, which I think represents the conservative liability policy we have and the conservative asset backing policy we have regarding the Jersey note. Yeah.
So in that sense, that kind of leads on to what would have been the first question on my order paper, which is that given the fact that it does say promise to pay the bearer, and there's certainly a public concept of legal tender, which may not necessarily be matched by the legal definition of it. A lot of people have expressed an opinion to us that they should always have the ability to pay with cash for a product or service. So, for example, it's fine to say you've got a £10 note which is worth £10, but if you can't spend it in certain places, what's the real value of it? So, do you have any preliminary observations about that point, Minister?
Well, I think it comes down to, as we've discussed before, a matter of commercial choice for businesses. If you have a £10 note, there is no reason why you should not be able to exchange that £10 note for goods or services as you wish. Now, if the supplier of the goods or services says, I don't want to take cash for whatever reason, maybe because I don't want the cash handling, the cost and the risk, because there is a risk to cash as well.
Yeah.
I don't want the cost or the risk. Therefore, I would like you to pay me by another means. That could be cheque. We still have cheques. It could be direct transfer. You know, so there is that element of, well, the customer may want choice, the supplier also has an element of choice as to whether they take it. Now, I think it's difficult to legislate for that because that adds to cost and bureaucracy and risk for the business.
So,
And the customer can go elsewhere. You know, there are still people who will quite happily take their cash. I don't think we're anywhere close to a situation where people are not able to use cash to get what they need.
okay. I don't know if we'll get any further with that line of questioning, and it's not necessarily for you. I mean, I think we do need to pursue it, though, so that there is an argument to say that the logical conclusion of the direction of travel now is that if we purely leave it down to businesses, and more businesses are saying that they don't want cash, because I think we've heard the empirical evidence experienced evidence tends to be for businesses that there are so many disadvantages to using cash that it doesn't make any logical sense for businesses to accept cash other than to provide choice for customers. So would that pose a problem for government at some point? And in fact, does it pose a problem for government now that government intervention is no longer needed? So government no longer needs to issue cash to banks for people to be able to buy things?
I think that's a very long way away because government still takes cash. And there will be people may, you know, as Russell said, people use cash amongst themselves. So it may be you go out for dinner, you split the bill and your friends say, oh, I owe you money, I'll give you £20, that's fine. I still think we're a very long way from businesses as a whole saying we won't take cash. I think that there's a bigger point about, we're just saying this outside, you know, there's an element of, we're talking about all these businesses who failed. There is an element of businesses have to look to the future and we all have to look to the future. And I think there is a big piece in terms of enabling people to move on to digital frameworks or to use a card. Now, cards have been around for 50 years. You know, even people in their 80s could have had cards for 40 or 50 years because they've been around for that long. And there's a very small number of people who won't have a card that they can use to either get cash if that's what they want, or to then use that as a payment token, if you like, as a payment mechanism. And I think to say we're just going to hang on to cash ad infinitum, you know, I think there will always be businesses where it's very difficult. You know, I was thinking this other day, I am not sure if you wanted to buy a plane ticket, I am not sure how you would do that if you didn't have a bank account. Because you go online, you buy that's how you do it. Now, you possibly can go into a travel agent and say, will you book this ticket? Here's my cash. But you will incur a cost from doing that, I imagine, and commissions. So I think the important thing is that we do help people who are not digitally enabled to become digitally enabled so that they also have that choice. I mean, if cash is your only tool, then arguably you don't have a choice. Choice has been taken away from you because you can't then use those other mechanisms. So I think there is an element of digital exclusion, I think, is possibly the bigger immediate problem than people not taking cash. That's my personal opinion, and I don't have stats to back that up, but that would be my concern.
Thank you. So bringing this back to specifically government and the Treasury, a more general point, do you think that government should be providing services that are not necessary to the public, generally as a political?
Should be providing services? Well, it depends what that service is.
I would put it to you that actually government, we're in the type of world now that government doesn't need to get involved in the personal transactions that people make by issuing.
I don't think it should.
By issuing cash. So government doesn't. There's no longer a need for government to issue cash, you could argue, because we live in a digital world, and actually government should just be focusing on digital inclusion.
There is clearly a need for cash. I'm not saying we're focusing on digital inclusion. I said that is one of the things that everybody needs to think about. But
why is there a need for cash? Is what I'm asking.
Well, there's still a demand for it. As Russell said, we have 90 million in circulation, and that is driven by the banks coming to us saying we want cash, and they are getting cash to issue to their customers. You know, there are still people when if I go to the UK, I always go and take some sterling notes out at the airport. There are, as you said, people still want an element of cash, so there's still a demand for it. And as long as there is some demand for it, we need to provide it. And I think there may come a time where I don't think there would ever be some kind of, I can't personally foresee a situation where we would have some kind of big bang that says we're not doing any more cash.
Okay.
That I think that the demand will just gradually dry up. We will gradually, the bank will be depositing cash with us. We'll give them the money back. They digitise it, if you use that word. So the demand will just fall away. I can't ever see, I can't see a situation where you would just say we're not doing cash anymore. I mean, central governments, whether you do it through government or you do it through the central bank, like the Bank of England, the Bank of Ireland, Bank of various banks, issue notes, you know. And
I'm just going to bring Deputy Wilson, I think she wants to ask.
Yeah, so it's just, I mean, the issues that we've heard from people across the island have been quite stark in terms of their affinity with cash and their relationship with it. And I just wondered whether, from a Treasury perspective, you believe that that has any merit in actually planning what the future government position will be in relation to how you address things like digital inclusion, how you address consumer choice, how you address, you know, the ability to use cash freely as an option without being forced into a digital environment, and that's the issue at the heart of the matter, which is the choice. So do you feel that because of some of the ways in which the banks are starting to operate, that we're being forced to think about the fact that digital payments are going to be the only choice that's going to be available in the longer term, and therefore cash is going to be excluded as a choice in the longer term?
I think that is something, if that happened, that would not, I cannot see that happening as a matter of government policy. It happens because of public lack of interest, because people just stop using cash and they stop asking for it from the bank because they use their phones or their cards. And I think even people who have vulnerabilities can still have cards. You know, we have mechanisms in place. But I don't think government can impose on business, you must take cash, because if we do that, it will increase cost. It will automatically increase cost, because people will say, that means I have to have somebody who's taking cash, I've got to keep cash, I've got to count it, I've got to reconcile it, because I don't want to find at the end of the month that my cash flow of £500 is now 25 and I've no idea where the money's gone. So there is a cost, and that cost will be passed on to consumers. And I think I do think there is an element of, there will be a very gradual move away from cash, because, as I say, people who are in their 80s now have been using cards for 40 years potentially. Children will be using people who are children now will be using their phones. There is an issue where people, as they get older, become less able to use digital means. But if you can use a card to pay, that's possibly easier than dealing with banknotes, particularly the new
would
form
it be
of
worth
banknotes.
picking up the issue? Sorry, Minister, thank you.
Can I just ask one question?
Sure, yeah.
And if ever sometimes we might need to curtail the answers, just because we've got a lot to get
Sorry.
to, but
Yeah.
so don't take that as any sign
That's
of
fine. Understood.
rudeness on our part. Can I just ask though, maybe it's one that your officers can answer, do you think that in 100 years' time government will still be issuing cash, paper cash?
It's hard to project forward 100 years. I'm not sure I could. I'm not sure what the position cash was 100 years ago.
I mean, I'd say, I'm not here to answer the questions, but I would put money on it, saying that I don't think I can't envisage government issuing cash in 100 years' time. I would have thought we'd be entirely cashless in 25 years' time.
I suppose the thing to remember is that even though you're seeing a reduction in the currency in circulation, there's a material amount of demand from the banks for cash still. So this year alone, we had demand from the banks for £52 million worth of currency.
But how much is that compared to 10 years ago?
I'm not sure from 10 years ago. Over the last sort of 5 years, there's definitely a marginal downward trend, but still
I think
The
we've had the
demand
stats, it was
remains
about
there.
130 or 120 from memory about 4 or 5 years ago,
With the value in
pre-COVID.
value in circulation, so the current value in circulation of 97 is roughly where we were back in 2013 for value in circulation. But part of that is that banks these days don't have vault space, so they're probably more footloose in terms of demanding money from
What were we in
Treasury.
2019, for example?
Where were we? 2019, we were 112.
Okay. And
That was around the peak. And so then we had the COVID years, 115, 116, before it started to reduce. So
what's the most it's been in the last 10 years?
116 million was the largest liability that we've ever had.
Okay. So it's still a fair drop off, isn't it, from 116 down to 90 this year?
I wouldn't use the June one because you've got the post-Christmas,
Yeah.
so the figure to compare to is probably the 97. So it is a reduction in use of currency, certainly.
Okay. Thank you. So,
It's okay. I was just going to, in the way that the chair sort of started with a question down the order paper, I might just at this point do the same if that's okay. But just in terms of the issue around the use of the fall in cash across the island, we've been looking at some of the evidence coming from Sweden where they introduced cashless society, and now they're starting to perhaps reverse engineer some of their banking arrangements and the way in which people manage cash. They're having to manage measures or introduce new measures to actually accommodate an increased use of cash, having been cashless. Do you anticipate having to prepare for something like that if we do go down the route in Jersey?
I have no intention of going cashless.
Okay.
It's just not policy. Given the other things I've seen in Jersey in terms of how difficult it is to change things, going cashless is just not going to happen anytime soon.
can you
And
pay
I
your,
think it would happen organically by demand just dropping away. I cannot see that being government policy.
can you pay your tax bill in cash?
It would depend the amount, that's his
Yes,
share.
you can pay up to £1,000 in cash at customer and local services
At any one time, so you could pay it all off in cash, but
at any one time. So, I mean, the customer and local services cashier's debt is very much, front-facing for members of the public who can't pay by any other means. So, and there are people who do go in and pay cash amounts for tax, social security, and actually all the government invoices that we issue as well. So, any of those can be paid at customer and local services cashiers, up to £1,000, and the intention is just to have that sort of facility in Union Street as well. So that will continue.
is there any plans to automate that kind of thing so people could pay cash, or would you envisage keeping a cashier?
I did have a look. On average, it's about 5 people a day coming in, paying for something in cash at customer local services. So there's still a bit of a demand, but it's not a huge demand in terms of people requesting that.
Would it be inappropriate to ask why those people would be paying cash? What situations might they be in?
I don't know the detail, but it's personal circumstances, I suppose.
I mean, I know of one situation because a constituent of mine had Tommy Binnison because she had gone to pay her cash and it was slightly over £1,000 and it became a bit difficult because of our money laundering rules. But yes, she was a lady, quite an elderly lady, and what she does is she goes and she takes the cash out of her bank and she walks up and hands over the cash. That's what she's always done. And now she has made arrangements for her bank to pay it. Now, to me, having a very elderly lady walking around with over £1,000 in cash, that's quite worrisome.
Yeah.
In terms of the risk that we talked about, loss and theft. But she has spoken to her bank. The bank's now helping her pay.
Okay. Good.
Okay, thank you. It's fine.
Max, can I pass over to you?
Yep, thank you very much, Chair. There was obviously mention about the currency fund, and of course there is a demand with local credit lenders seeking local coins and notes as well. But would the existence of a fund potentially be under threat if cash was no longer in demand, and say if it fell beneath 10 million, for instance?
Possibly, but it's hard to envision a scenario where it wouldn't be in demand. So I suppose, Treasury would need to move with the times. If suddenly nobody demanded cash, then of course the currency fund would need to be reconsidered. But we're a long, long way away from that.
Yeah.
But I think there would always be a need for the fund because the fund reflects the cash that is in circulation. So as long as our books say there is money in circulation, we have to be able to repay it. So you would have to be, it'd be a very, very long-term thing, you know, if you, and I can't see, you know, when does something become bona vacantia, you know, at what point, if you think we haven't had a claim in this fund for, we'd be talking about a very long time before you would say the risk of this coming forward is negligible, so we're going to close the fund. Because I could have £20 now, or you could give £50 to a child now who sits on it and presents 50 years' time, discovers it and go, oh, how much is my £50 worth?
So how would it work, for instance, because obviously when we look at our currency, it's linked to sterling. And if we are moving towards a digitalised world, would there always need to be a facility within the Treasury and Exchequer for credit lenders to potentially use, or would that disappear in the future?
I'm not sure if credit lenders is the right expression. You know, if somebody says they're fed up with cash, they don't want any more cash, the logical thing for them to do would be just to pay it into the bank. The bank has it, and at some point it will find its way back to us. And I think what often happens when there's new series of notes, and I think Russell says, we have never said this note is not valid. We've never said this note is of no value. So if somebody appeared with a very old note, what was the Class A ones you talked about?
The old,
a very old
shilling
note.
ones.
So somebody finds the piggy bank that's stuffed full of old notes. They may take them into the bank, and the bank would say, well, we're not touching those. They would come to us, and we would then either issue them with crisp new shiny notes, or we would credit the money into their bank account, I imagine. So there is always that potential for someone to appear with a note, and we would honour it, because it's a promise to pay. And if the bank doesn't honour the promise, and sometimes they will say, we're not accepting this whole, like the Bank of England, I think the Bank of England demonetise notes, don't they, where they say, if you have not used it by this amount of time, shops won't have to take it to the bank or take it to this place, and we will exchange it for a new version.
Yeah. Can I just ask, in the Treasury and Exchequer, do you hold foreign currency as well, like other states, or is it just
No.
domestic currency?
So the Jersey currency is purely a physical currency. So its only purpose effectively is almost a promise to pay back the underlying sterling, the electronic currency. So really, it effectively is just a mechanism for the banks to easily get hold of currency, as opposed to getting an armoured car on the Condor ferry to restock their cash points from now and again.
And can I just ask, have you had any engagement from, say, any individuals who've approached you seeking Jersey coinage or notes, or has it only been banking institutions?
Very occasionally we get a letter from individual collectors who would say, can I have £30 worth of Jersey notes? Here's my cheque for £30, and we'll try to support them and send it off to them. But we wouldn't be interested because of AML. If somebody came to us and said, I'd like £1,000 worth of Jersey currency, then that would be the sort of thing I would be nervous about. And I would say, go to your bank to deliver that, and the bank can deal with the customer due diligence, and we would provide the currency to the bank effectively.
And usually where would that transfer take place? Do you have officers who would maybe meet somebody at CLS, or would that be in Broad Street?
It's very infrequent. So most of the time it would be somebody's written a physical letter. Often, I think there are a couple of German collectors, for example, who would literally send a message to Treasury titled whoever's in charge of currency. It would come to me, and it would literally be a cheque for £30, and we would do what we can to. So it's not really an official process. It's more to try to help out the public.
Something we necessarily want to promote.
To promote as well, absolutely. No.
Deputy, can I just ask a question on that? Do you have any idea of how much is in circulation that is different to businesses, to individuals? So, you know, other businesses that come forward who actually say to you, I've had this pot of money in my accounts for, or my green box in my garage or restaurant or whatever. Do businesses behave the same way towards this in the same way that consumers do?
We would be one step removed from that, I suppose. It's the banks that deal with their customers, and we deal
Rather
with the
than
banks.
Treasury.
It's not really something that we don't really have the facility to validate the identity of individuals, so it's quite difficult. So we do rely on the banks to liaise with their customers.
Okay.
And all I know is that the overall demand from the banks is quite robust. So
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's feasible that a business has a cash box and they're changing premises or something, and the cash box gets put to one side and forgotten about, but I can't see that we would have
can't
any
see that, do you?
visibility of that,
Okay.
other than the general what is in circulation.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, Deputy. There are obviously a number of concerns in terms of the grey economy where transactions take place and there's no record, especially when we're looking at cash. And I want to know whether you have any concerns about that currently, and whether you believe a digitalised world will be an improved world to track those transactions.
Do you want to talk about that? Well, cash businesses, I think Revenue Jersey do compliance work on businesses that are heavy cash users. You know, there are some types of businesses that you would anticipate would be heavy users of cash. And Revenue Jersey, I think, do some compliance activities on all businesses, whether they're cash or non-cash.
Yeah.
So they would be looking at correct processing of cash. There probably are cases where money is changing hands. Will that move into an electronic format? I don't know. It may do in the future, but I would imagine those are relatively small situations.
Yeah.
Could you?
I don't know if you've got anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a factor that certainly that, Revenue Jersey will take account of in terms of all their compliance activity, the risks of particular businesses, and they always have done. So, that could, will carry on in the future as well.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair.
I was just going to follow up on that and do come back in after, but so in terms of the estimated money lost to the Treasury by undeclared tax liability, do you have a figure for that?
Not in my head,
estimate?
no. Not in my head, no.
Do you accept that there is an element of that in Jersey and presumably in any?
I imagine there will be in any jurisdiction, there will be an element of undeclared people not declaring.
And do you think that is pronounced when people are paid in cash? Or do you think there's people are more likely to underdeclare their income if they're paid in cash?
Paid in cash by their employer, the employer should be keeping records, because the employer should still be deducting Social Security and tax. So even if that person is receiving cash, they should still receive a payslip. They should still receive.
What about casual work and self-employed people, that kind of?
I don't know how that. I'm not sure how that would work. But even if you are self-employed, you still have a duty to account for your earnings. And if people are not doing that, then as I say, we would look at, if we know somebody's self-employed, they should be paying self-employed contributions, and they were paying tax and declaring self-employed income. And if they are under-declaring, I think Revenue Jersey will do some amount of compliance work.
Do you accept it's easier to misdeclare, underdeclare if you're getting paid cash, because if you do get reviewed, there's no audit trail.
I think it will be, because the employer returns should disclose. Would say, I have paid this person that amount of money, and if the person's return says I earned that amount of money minus £2,000. I mean, I'm not sure if how those would be tied up, and I don't know. I'm not suggesting we do that kind of investigation. I don't think we would necessarily compare the two, but we would have to ask the controller about that.
Yeah,
I don't know the operational reality of how that works, but there could be people who are given tips or. I just don't know. But you are meant, the tax reform says, are you given tips, gratuities as part of your work? You are meant to account for those and declare them for tax.
Sure.
Yeah. A number of submissions have raised concerns about the government and potentially the fact that they feel that the government could maybe be invasive, looking at, say, digitalised payments in the future. And that might be, say, with banking institutions. So I'd just like to get your opinion, just to provide some clarity in response to some of those members who've articulated those concerns.
I would be very reluctant to use the term invasive. I think government has got to keep records of money it receives. So if if somebody declares their tax, they issue a tax return, we have to keep a record of the money they give us, whether they give it electronically or in cash, we have to keep that record. And there is good reason for doing that, because A, it shows they've paid, and it's for the public finances how much money we've collected. And there is no option but for us to do that. Anybody handling money has to do that. Particularly with tax, that is held very, very confidentially. The tax team won't even tell me the names of taxpayers. It is very confidential. So there is the tax team are not sharing information with other parts of government. And I think similarly under data protection and general privacy law, government is subject to the same data protection rules. So we should only be collecting the data we need. We should only be using it for the purpose that it's collected, and we should be letting it go when we no longer need it. And we should not share that data unless we have clear gateways to do that. So government are not I don't think government is not building up kind of intelligence files on citizens based on cash payments.
Can I just follow? I do want to push the issue about whether or not we would be better off, or government would be better off as a society if cash didn't exist, purely in terms of tax revenues. So if I put a scenario to you, it's hypothetical. I make my money by selling apples, okay? And I declare that in 1 month I've sold 1,000 apples for £1 each, and my profit is relative to that. But actually, in fact, I've sold 2,000 apples, and then I say, if anyone comes asking, I just say, oh, I lost 1,000 apples to wastage. They got stolen or they went rotten, I had to chuck them out. And of course, if tax comes and looks at me and says, can I see your books? I'll show them the books with the 1,000 apples that I've sold. And because everyone's been paying me with cash, there's no way to audit that. You just take my word for it. Whereas if we are in a cashless society where everything's come through, you can say, well, let's look at your bank details. Can I see what are all these transactions that you've had? You've had 2,000 transactions. Can you explain that? Is that a legitimate concern in terms of the problem about making sure people comply in a cashless society versus one where cash is used to pay for things?
I would think that any circumstance where there is a record, and by paying digitally you create a record in a bank statement, at some point the bank will say you will get a statement from your bank saying this is the amount of money that's come in. Now, even if you still chose to underdeclare, Revenue Jersey could say, well, this seems a bit odd because you said you're selling 1,000 apples, but this seems a bit peculiar because we know how big your farm is and we look how much previous owners have sold. There would at that point be compliance work, and they may ask for more evidence.
That becomes quite tenuous, doesn't it? It's not tax departments to speculate on one's business model or how much natural wastage there is in that system.
Well, as I say, we're getting into an operational area that I don't know what compliance is.
I know these are hypothetical questions, but would it not be a benefit in a cashless society that everything is trackable from a government point of view? Therefore, when you ask to see the books and the bank statements, it's all there.
It would only be trackable if we asked to see it and they gave it over, but that would be part of the compliance work, which says this looks a bit odd. Can you? Because I think we don't normally ask people to provide all their invoices and the receipts. We say just tell us the numbers, and that's fine. But I think we would have the ability to say these numbers aren't stacking up. I think we have the ability to ask for questions, and that's.
And do you accept that you've got more ability to make those sums add up?
I think it would be clearer if you can say to someone, can I see your bank statement? Can I see your business bank statement to see what it says? Now, I assume we have the ability to do those investigations, but we don't have direct access to people. We would still have to come and ask to see things.
And tax is done on a trust basis, essentially, isn't it? You declare your income.
I think it largely is in Jersey. Yeah, yes, you're relying people to declare honestly and fully. And if they don't, then clearly that's...
But you do have mechanisms to then do checks on businesses that you...
Yeah, I mean, Revenue Jersey do those compliance activities. They do look at the risk of a business, and, if there's less businesses, collecting cash at the moment, probably the risk in that area overall for the island has probably diminished. Yeah. But obviously, they take all account of that in terms of their compliance activity. When looking at businesses to look at for compliance, they'll be taking account of how they collect, and any particular issues around the business.
Do you require there to be additional scrutiny or additional surveillance around businesses that are not digitalised?
Well, once again, I think Revenue Jersey just build into that, into all their compliance activity. They take account of that in choosing which businesses to
Yeah,
look
I mean, I
at and
think
to what extent.
we do have policy and procedures around fraud and criminality and money laundering, so I don't know, again, I don't know whether we would do it on a random basis, or
don't know.
is it
That's
if
the controller.
something kind of raised the flag and you think this is odd, because clearly we can't review everybody's accounts, so it
suppose I
does
was-
rely
I was
on
just trying
people
to do-
being honest.
Yeah, I was just trying to establish whether or not, given that there are processes and compliance systems in place, whether they are different for a business that is transacting digitally or a business transacting in cash. Does it require additional effort?
Well, we are still just looking at the tax return. We would look at the tax return, and then I suppose it depends on whether it either comes up for either does it, I don't know
Okay.
if there is any amount of random sampling, I just don't know. Or is it, we have a procedure and it runs through a possibility and we think there is something not right there, we are going to ask some questions.
Who would we ask if we wanted to?
That would
put a
have
written-
to be the controller. I think we'd have to ask the tax team about that, because that's quite a detailed operational aspect. I just
that's
don't
fine.
know, I'm speculating.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
I think, so what, that subject then follows on to the next question. So the Jersey Financial Services issue guidelines in respect of high-value dealers for transactions over 12,500.
10,000, I thought. Anyway,
Okay, you think it's 10,000?
I thought it was 10, but it may have changed. You might be right, sorry. I had 10,000 in my head.
It may have gone up, but that's the figure I've got in front of me. But it's a ballpark anyway, isn't it? There are no such limitations for digital payment receipts. And do you have any comment as to why this may be the case and the impact this may have on businesses?
I think digital payments will be, because this will all be linked into our anti-money laundering regime. So if you're a dealer and the money is coming from a bank, you will be largely relying on the bank's processes in terms of having due diligence on the customer, in terms of where their funds are coming from. If you're a bank and somebody gets paid £5,000 a month and suddenly they get £25,000 in from nowhere, you might ask a question about that, maybe not £25,000. So, but dealers can largely rely on banks with digital currencies and whoever is paying to have done that amount of work for them. The issue with high value dealers, that's about people taking cash amounts.
Yeah.
And I think to become a high value, I think the way the high value dealer regime works is it says if you want to take cash of more than that amount, you must be registered, you must be regulated, and here are all the policies that you have to do, and nobody wants to do that.
That's right. No, I think it's obvious that there's an audit trail when it comes to wire transfers or contactless payments. I suppose one question is that in terms of disruptive technology, that there is an almost hybrid method of paying for things, so if we imagine cards that can be topped up, for say things like Revolut or other cards like that, are there any considerations about somebody who might be paying for a high value dealer, not in cash, but on that kind of card, which isn't automatically linked to a bank account necessarily?
I don't know, because again, I don't really understand Revolut very well, but I think the cash has to be put in, and I imagine Revolut has its own flags in terms of if somebody was putting in, because again, that has to be digital, so Revolut isn't taking cash, it will be taking money from other financial services organisations, so whether it relies on money coming from one of the big banks.
And I think there is due diligence anyway.
And there will be an element of yes, I mean, you have still, I think you have got to give them identity material. They do have to prove your identity like other banks. But they are, because they're digital, they will only be taking money, I think, from banks or other regulated entities.
Thank you. That's fine. I'm going to pass over to T. Wilson.
So, thank you. Minister, submissions to the panel identify that cash use is anticipated to fall further in the coming years, as we've already talked about this morning. What would be the feasibility of the government providing or aiding in banking services?
I don't think we're at that stage, because we have we have plenty of banks on the island. We have 5 banks, and we would have to be in a position where we had no banks at all before government set up its own bank. That's an immense undertaking. I believe they have done it in Gibraltar because they found themselves in a situation with no banks, but we are not in that position. If it had to be done, I'm sure it could be done, but I wouldn't like to be the one doing it. I think we're very far off that situation.
Okay, irrespective of some of the bank closures that we've witnessed recently.
I think branch closures are different from bank closures. The banks are all still healthy. I think Lloyd's is still it's still wanting to grow, I believe. Most of the banks still see room for growth in Jersey. Again, I'm speculating, but I think there is still, there is, Jersey is a place they want to do business.
Are you able to sort of outline, given that scenario around the fall in cash, what sort of short, medium and longer term initiatives you might have to consider in that scenario?
I think in terms of provision of banking, that's possibly sits with the Deputy Gorst. But I think we're a very long way off government having to step in. And, you know, there are ways, community savings can do minor cash payments for people who have relatively simple needs in terms of cash. It was simply trying to put money in deposits, making small loans. Community savings, I believe, can issue a card for people, and that is often what people want to have cards because it gives them access to, it's just easier for them. But I don't think, I can't see anything in the short or medium or long term that government needs to be thinking about in terms of availability of banking or cash.
And can I just press you on that in relation to those people who are unable to hold a bank account? What kinds of actions could be undertaken to help them manage their cash transactions?
I think in Jersey there are very small numbers of people who don't have bank accounts. I think the banks are aware of that. I don't know what the banks are doing in terms of giving accounts to people. CLS will issue. I think if someone's on benefits and doesn't have a bank account, they will be able to get a cheque which they can cash. Or I think we do still issue cash to some people.
Okay, thank you. And the panel has also been informed that some banks are limiting the amount of cash that a business or charity may transact. Are you aware of any such practices around this at all?
No.
No? Okay.
That's not a particular Treasury aspect. It's not. I'm not quite sure what you mean limiting transactions, but again, that may be driven by the anti-money laundering framework and the financial crime framework, rather than there are rules about certain charities, particularly those who are operating, I believe, in high-risk jurisdictions. I'm not totally expert on that, but those rules may be driven by anti-money laundering rules rather than the banks just being awkward. But I don't know.
Okay, so do you think that the Treasury should look at that in any shape or form?
I don't think it's a Treasury issue. It's a financial.
Financial services issue.
If it's a government issue, it sits with financial services.
Yeah.
It's not. Treasury does not have a role in regulating or policing the banks.
Thank you. One of the questions that we have asked others, and we'd like to hear your views on this, but do you believe that non-acceptance of cash to be discriminatory?
No, because, well, you have, where is the discrimination? Because discrimination goes to protected characteristics. And are you discriminating against a person on the basis of a protected characteristic? And I think that's a lawyer's answer. I think it's just a choice.
in the natural definition of the word, not necessarily
in the wider discrimination. I
of-
think we've said choice, but I think to the extent consumers have choice, businesses also
why
have to have a
has
degree of
government
choice.
taken the decision to ensure that people can pay for things in cash then? It must be because they don't want to discriminate against people.
No, it's because there is a demand. It's because there is a demand. We have to provide customer services, And if there is as long as there is a demand.
But so do certain monopolies, presumably. I mean, Condor provides services for people. They provide various services
I
that
don't
no one
know
else
if
does.
Condor's taking cash or not. I can't.
Doesn't
I
take
can't
cash.
speak for Condor.
But just to, sorry to cut
No,
across,
it's okay,
but
it's all right.
just to get to the philosophy, Minister, which is if government says it needs to accept cash and there are other services that are provided either arm's length, you know, I mean, Connex is a good, not Connex, I'm going back a few years, Liberty Bus, the bus service, you can pay cash on the bus, for example, but if they were to say overnight we don't take cash anymore, then of course we've got a public service which is no longer accessible to people who want to pay cash and can only pay cash. Would that not be discriminatory?
I'm not sure it's discriminatory. It would be bad business practice, I would have thought.
But you could say it's
But government
discriminatory.
is in a different position from other businesses because we are required to provide public services, and if customers, consumers, islanders want to pay in cash, we enable them to pay in cash. And we're not going to stop doing that. But I think for government to say to private enterprise, you must do this, that or the other, is difficult, and it may lead to more cost and bureaucracy for those businesses which will put up prices.
Could we say that if you don't have a bank account and you can't have a bank account and you rely on cash to transact, then if a business, say if all the coffee shops in Jersey stop taking cash, if you don't have a bank account, you can't go and buy a coffee. And I don't think there's a government-run coffee shop yet, is there?
Not that I'm aware. No, we don't compete.
So would that not be problematic for?
I think we're a long way away from that, and I still think we have to have every coffee shop not taking cash, and we have to have people who only have cash, and the people who only have cash probably don't sit around coffee shops every day because they can't afford to. So those people, we need to be looking to support those people as to how they find a way. I think it'd be better to support those people to have cards that they can go in and use a card than to say to all the businesses.
And so is that a government initiative you would consider, helping people who don't have
I think
bank
banks
accounts?
do that. No, I think we need to. There is a matter of commerciality, what government chooses to do and what it chooses to impose on businesses. I think the banks do a lot of work in terms of helping customers become digitally enabled. Yeah. And the number of people who don't have bank accounts is very small, but as I say, community savings can give cards to people who can issue cards to people.
Could I bring
in
the
that
director to
situation.
the finance hub? So clearly customer local services can provide certain facilities to facilitate. Would there be any scope for customer and local services to provide a kind of facility where they could either facilitate digital literacy, get people set up? So for example, you know, somebody who has trouble booking things online, somebody who, or even going a step further and saying that there might be a machine in customer local services where you can pay cash in and you get issued with a card that can be spent in the local community, a bit like the £100 card, which was preloaded for during COVID. Could that be something that might be offered?
Yeah, I mean, customer local service already do support people in terms of when they come in terms of if they want to pay by cash or cheque, you know, highlighting other opportunities of different ways of pay and potentially show them on top of, you know, screens in terms of how they could pay digitally as well. So they're doing that already for government services. So I suppose it is the next step. That's something that could potentially be provided, but there's no plans to do that at the moment.
No.
And could there be like a hub where it's actually, so there could be third sector that come in and facilitate people, a bit like Citizens Advice, but
Well, that's community savings. Community savings does that role.
Yeah.
Community savings
But you
will
have to
help
be a member, I think, and have a
people. I don't think there's a cost to being part of community savings. I think if you're a person who cannot get banking facilities, you can go to community savings, and I think they are able to. I believe they are able to do some kind of savings scheme, and I believe they're able to make small loans, and they can issue cards to people. And a lot of people want cards, but some people want cash. And if you know, cash is still available, widely available.
Just following on from that, I mean, there've been those who've highlighted that cash is important to teach or build budgeting skills, and that digital payments may lead to lower financial intelligence, such as falling into debt. How, in your view, might government promote that kind of financial wisdom.
And it could easily form part of the curriculum.
Do you think government has a role in encouraging people to use cash as much as encouraging them to use digital means?
I don't think it's for government to really tell people what to do. It's a matter of what suits them. What suits them. And some people like cash. Some people find it easier to use cash when money's tight. Other people just they just, as you say, have an affinity to it and they just like having it around. Other people are quite happy just to use their phone for everything.
Okay. Did you want to add anything to that?
And I don't think we should be pushing people into one thing or the other. And I think citizens' advice help people with budgeting advice as well. I'm sure community savings as well. You know, there are bodies out there that help people. And I think the other thing I would actually, sorry, have we got time? Can I talk
Got
about
another half an hour.
something we haven't spoken about yet, which I think is very relevant to all of this, is, you know, we have put laws in place to help people who have issues with capacity. So if you have, and we've modernised the law, the old curatorship law, meant that if you lacked capacity and a curator was appointed, you lost all control. The curator made all your decisions for you. It gave you the money that they thought you needed. It didn't let you have money to go and, if you wanted to go and put £10 on a horse, the curator could say, oh no, that's a waste of money, you're not having that. But with the new capacity law, we have set up arrangements where somebody can appoint an attorney to take decisions before they lose capacity, and the new delegate position is designed to enable people to have the freedom they want. So this addresses, to some degree, addresses a point about vulnerability. So in my previous role, I did act as delegate for people, and we would have some clients, sometimes quite young clients, who could have a card and were very happy to take money out and spend it on, buy lunch and a CD, whatever, but they couldn't manage rent and bills. So we paid the rent and bills and made the big spends for them. Equally, there were clients who we kind of knew they were going to put the money on a horse, but if they understand that they risk losing that money, then it's an unwise decision and they're entitled to make that unwise decision. So the laws have adapted in the last few years to help people, so that there is a framework to help people who struggle with money, to help them deal with money, make the decisions about money that they can. So I just think that is quite an important point to make.
Just building on that, I mean, if I can come back to the point around legislation. So would you argue that what you've just described is potentially related to a need to legislate further for the acceptance of cash payments in Jersey?
I think that's going too far. I mean, that I said that is a legal mechanism that people are helped to manage their money, and some of those people are using cards. So it's not just vulnerability equals you can only have cash. There are some people who do want cash. Some of those people will be better with cash because a card would be too much for them. That is a long way from saying government has to legislate for the acceptance of cash, and I don't believe that would be the right thing to do.
Okay, so some have basically identified that there may be a wish to intervene on a case-by-case basis. Are there any specific payments that could be identified as requiring intervention?
In what way?
Well, in some aspects, it comes back to this issue around the discrimination issues that we've talked about and the capacity issues. So at the moment, are you satisfied that the legislative framework that you've just outlined protects and safeguards those individuals who choose to use cash?
I think the framework I was just talking around, the capacity law, is completely separate from whether or not people use cash. I think the businesses that are in the businesses, I think businesses who are providing services that are essential, so things like electricity and telecoms, and they understand the vulnerability of their customers, and they do look, and the banks understand the vulnerability of their customers, and they are very careful in dealing with those customers. But I think that is, they do that as a matter of good business practice. And I don't think Liberty Bus, I don't think they would get very far if they were leaving pensioners or children at the bus stop because they only had cash. You know, that's a JEP headline waiting to happen. And I think it'd be very difficult for them to say that unless they were going to provide customers with cards. I mean, that could be, they could say to people, this card will allow you to use the bus freely.
I mean, okay. Can I just ask?
And there are,
Just to follow on from Deputy Wilson's point, so we've had people giving us both verbal and written evidence who are, let's say, pro-choice, so that they wouldn't want to mandate businesses to take cash, but there seem to be some carve-outs that they've highlighted. So, for example, Digital Jersey, this is in the public domain, of course, said that government, I don't believe government should mandate the acceptance of cash on any business unless it's a business that offers an essential or a regulated service where access needs to be protected. So it could be transport and utilities, two which you've coincidentally highlighted. So do you think, because we will need to make findings and recommendations after this review to government, do you think it would be reasonable for us to recommend that certain businesses that do provide those either monopoly services or those essential services or arm's length services to government should accept all forms of payment?
I'm sure they do. I haven't heard any question that they don't. I do not believe that Jersey Electricity is going to cut people off. If somebody turns up and says, I only have cash, I want to pay my bill in cash, I cannot believe they would cut someone off for not paying cash.
Like
because they have other mechanisms. I'm sure they have other mechanisms.
We could extend it. So in the sphere of transport, you have Liberty Bus who say, we'll take cash, but we'll charge you more for it. So the charge it's 20% more to pay a cash fare than it is a card fare. For example, petrol stations, you know, people need presumably to get around in their cars, and they need to access petrol stations. And increasingly, petrol stations are saying we don't accept cash. So you could entirely be left if you haven't seen the sign, or if there is no sign. You filled up your car, and then you go in to pay cash, and they say, "Sorry, we don't take cash." Is that an issue which you think we could justifiably make a recommendation around those types of essential services?
I would still be very, very hesitant to legislate for people to take cash.
Okay.
Because it will be a cost. So if the garage is saying, I can operate with one person taking card payments, if I need two people because somebody's got to count the cash and handle the cash and count it at the end of the day and reconcile it, that's a new person, the price goes up at the pumps. So I think you have to allow for businesses to operate in a way that's efficient, that helps them keep costs down. And as soon as you insist on businesses doing something, you risk costs going up.
And is it okay to say that if a business said we only want to take cash, is that also okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. If a business says it wants to take cash, then it does. I mean, I know businesses that do that.
Okay. Thank you.
I think, yes, consumer choice is very important, but I think businesses also have an element of choice in how they run their operations. And I think there are few, I don't think there are many who say, we will only do one or the other.
So why shouldn't government have a choice?
What, a choice to do, a choice in what?
To not take cash? Why should government and government
because
departments?
Because it would be appropriate. Because
Why?
we are providing service, because there is a demand from islanders. Okay. As long as there is a demand from islanders, and we are meeting demand from islanders, and they can pay by cheque, they can pay by cash, they can pay by card, they can pay online, and that is what they want. We have.
So Jersey Tele.
You said the other day we get more requests for people to for us to facilitate electronic payment than we do to facilitate cash payments, because that's what people are wanting to do.
But you're saying there's a demand from the public to be able to pay in cash. That's why government.
Yes, if there is, as long as there's a demand for cash, I think it's right that we meet that demand.
And what about Jersey Telecom, which is state-owned?
I am sure they will take cash if they need to. I cannot imagine.
They're a business, so should they not have a choice to not take cash?
But they are providing a service. If somebody has a phone line, are they realistically? I don't believe Jersey Telecom are going to cut an old lady's phone line because she comes in to pay cash.
Would you vote to legislate to make Jersey Telecom have to take cash?
No, because I'm sure they do it. And if they weren't, we would be having a shareholder discussion with them.
And what about Shaw?
I don't think we need legislation. Sure's a private business. It can do what it wants. But if Sure says we are not going to take cash and they cut people off, that's very poor publicity for them. You know, Mrs. Smith, 87, has had her phone service cut because she wanted to pay cash. she can go to JT.
I think what's behind the line of questioning is how strong is government's position in terms of safeguarding the rights of consumers in being able to pay in cash as opposed to being expected to pay digitally?
I think all businesses need to move forward. You know, there is a need to move forward to make efficiencies, to operate as effectively, to keep costs down. But where you are providing an essential service, I am quite sure they will take cash. If somebody comes in and pays cash, or they will find a way of making that payment happen that suits everybody. But I cannot believe anybody's electricity is going to be cut off if they're a vulnerable customer because they're paying cash. And I don't think we need to legislate for that, because no business is going to want that publicity.
So are we to assume then that there is an expectation that government-provided services or government-supported services are expected to be reasonable and proportionate in exercising their responsibilities to consumers and making sure that they can offer a facility
That would be my
for
expectation, and
cash?
that is what I think happens. They will understand that they're providing, if they're providing electricity, it would be very, very bad publicity for them to cut people off because they want to pay cash. Particularly if that's a vulnerable customer. They are very good at addressing vulnerable customers and making sure that they deal with those customers. They are all very careful, I believe, in terms of how they deal with customers, particularly vulnerable customers, as do the banks.
But you're putting a lot of trust in the media there. You're almost saying that...
I'm not putting trust in
Well, you're saying that they could create bad publicity, but you're relying on somebody contacting one of the media outlets and then getting in front of a camera saying they wouldn't accept my
Also,
cash.
I do not believe that utilities are going to not take cash from vulnerable customers. And I don't think we need a law to do that. You know, it's just basic safeguarding, and of course they are not...
But it may not be a vulnerable, because it might just be someone who says, I don't want to pay by card, I want to pay you cash. I might do that, I'm not vulnerable.
I am sure they will take cash.
Do you believe, Minister, there are any additional policy drivers just to actually put those safeguards and those protections around that position at all?
I think they already exist.
Okay.
I
And
think we need to legislate for it.
okay, and what about, do you consider there to be any need for any legislative action to remove surcharges for cash on digital payments?
I'm not aware there are surcharges. We don't have surcharges.
No, we don't have surcharges on our payment types, and certainly the trend is certainly individuals not to do surcharges for credit and debit card payments. It's standard practice. So there's no plans to have surcharges or discounts for paying with particular methods.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, for my part, I think we've pretty much got everything I think we need from you. There might just be one small question at the end, and then I'll pass over to my colleagues if they've got any further questions. But do you have any? It's slightly oblique, not immediately linked to our review, but it is still in the orbit of it. Do you have any points or thoughts that you'd like to tell us about the acceptance of cheques or digital currency such as crypto, for example? Because we are in a changing world. Obviously, cheques seem to be on the way out, but some people still like them. I think partly probably because they create an audit trail for them. But crypto is something that is possibly on the rise. Do you have any thoughts, or is government preparing for either of those two eventualities?
I mean, in terms of cheques, we are seeing a gradual reduction in the use of cheques, although we are still getting quite a significant number still, up to about 30,000 a year. So there are businesses and individuals who still pay us by cheque, and so there's no plans to phase that out, but we are seeing it going down and down year on year as more people move to digital. So that is definitely a trend we are seeing, but it's still, and also the fact we do accept cheques is important for business continuity. If anything happened with digital channels, people can still pay us by cheque. It offers a different range of how someone can pay us. In terms of cryptocurrency, we haven't had any thoughts about that.
I think we're still away in cryptocurrency. I think there's still so much uncertainty about it, because partly from anything, because you can't tell. I mean, my hesitation doing anything with crypto is you can't tell the value of it from one day to the next. So there's a lack of certainty around it. So I think we're away.
If I could bring in the head of Treasury, I mean, this is, again, it's slightly different, but in terms of the investment, so we know you've got a currency fund, for example, you've got other, government more generally has savings. Is crypto something that government and the Treasury might consider investing in, so holding some of its funds in crypto rather than just in sterling?
We have a Treasury advisory panel to give us advice on asset classes. So crypto is not something we're currently considering. I know it's an asset class which some people see benefit in. At the moment, we have no intention to make allocations in that area.
Okay.
I think it's very high risk. I think it remains quite high risk.
Sure. Thank you.
Could I just ask finally, if you saw bank charges going up as a consequence of people using cash, would government intervene at all?
That's a commercial matter for the banks. I mean, the banks used to charge. You used to pay for your checks and your withdrawals, and banks moved into free banking. And this is my hesitation in legislating to require them to do things, because they will then start charging. And I don't think it would be unreasonable for them to charge if we put extra obligations on them, which increase their cost. But I think fees for transactions is not something they routinely do now. But if they felt they had to do that to fund activities that are being imposed on them, then I think it's difficult to, it'd be difficult to stop them doing
The
that.
government to take action, yeah, okay. Thank you.
I do want to just start, sorry, I know it's a bit of a Lieutenant Colombo moment, but just one more thing, kind of thing. And whilst we've got your officers here as well, Minister, we note that Europe seems to be going potentially in a slightly different direction, and even within Europe there are different tendencies. So there are countries which very much favour cash usage, and it's still high. So in Central Europe, Germany, Spain, France, people have a strong affinity for cash, more so than I think in Jersey and in the UK, and they're looking to protect access to cash and the ability for people to pay in cash, whereas Sweden is one of those countries which has moved rapidly towards a cashless society, but they might now have to introduce mitigating measures for those people who still want to use cash. I was wondering if I can ask your officers first, if they've got any thoughts about what's happening in Europe, and if there are any things that we would either consider as good examples or to try and avoid.
I suppose our use of cash is effectively driven by sort of technology in the bank. So I don't think we're necessarily on the bleeding edge. I would imagine that we would take quite a conservative line, or the banks would, in terms of making sure there's a good demonstrated model that works well. I don't think necessarily we're at that position yet. Like you say, Sweden had an experiment, and the banks will react to that experiment. And when they're further down the path and we perhaps see the UK take steps, I think Jersey would perhaps follow. But like I say, at the moment, I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah, I think, generally, obviously we respond to consumer demand, it's, where the consumers want to go. And, there was a tendency, you can see, there's been less cash transactions and cheque transactions happening in Jersey. We can see that as a government, and ultimately you might get somewhere in the future, but, that will be very much as a response to consumer demand, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Have you got any further points or questions for us, or remarks?
No, I mean, just on that last point, I think things will just evolve. We're in a highly adaptive situation in terms of how we pay for things. I only got a card on my phone 2 years ago when the person behind me, the ice cream stall, who was in his 70s, said, I'm standing with my fiver, and he's saying, can I pay by my phone? So I think it just adapts. I think possibly Jersey may be more inclined to adopt those technologies faster because we have so many people working in financial services. I don't know, but I would just see it as being something that will gradually evolve, and I think we should allow it to evolve.
Thank you. Well, once again, can I thank you for coming in? Thank you for the technical explanations at the beginning, and for putting your views, Minister, and your evidence forward. We do appreciate your time, and